What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 188, and today I'm joined by Patrick MacFarlane, my co-worker over at the Libertarian Institute. And of course, we just finished up our big fall fund drive. It was a huge success. I know Scott Horton, the boss over there, is really happy with how it turned out, and it's supporters of mine and Pat, along with people you might have heard of like Pete Quinones or Sheldon Richmond or Scott Horton, but you guys who turned up and are helping gain our institute off the ground and making our project there really one of the great things happening in the libertarian movement. So really excited about that, Pat, and I think we have a treat for the audience today. We got some interesting crimes to break down. The U.S. blowing up a bunch of civilians in Syria, Philly police opening up and killing an 8-year-old girl and then charging other people for the murder. And of course, the big news, Kyle Rittenhouse. So important stuff to cover today, Pat. Just want to remind people to check out the Libertarian Institute to find both mine and Pat's show and then share and support the show from there. The links to everything you could possibly need, all the information you need, you can find in the show notes at the Libertarian Institute, either for Conflicts of Interest or Liberty Weekly. Pat, before we get into it, I just want to thank the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com is a great place to go to get your CBD products. I really like their topicals. I use their sports cream most day. Very effective for back pain. It's a nice menthol smell, no Bengay or any like icy hot where you got to deal with the temperature changes. Just a nice lotion, works well, but they have great products including soft gels, gummies, extracts, even stuff for your dog. So check out PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use the promo code PEACE, P-E-A-C-E. When you check out, they'll save you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. All right, Pat, let's get into it and just open up with the big story. What I think probably most people in the U.S. are talking about right now, as far as they're talking about news, maybe aside from inflation, is this Kyle Rittenhouse trial that's going on. As listeners of this show know, when you're talking about something like the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, there's two different things going on. There's the law and the trial, which are being evaluated, and then there's the actual truth of what happened. And so, just because a certain result comes of the trial, that doesn't also necessarily mean that was a reflection of the truth of the matter and justice has been served. And so let's get into the legal stuff and break down the trial first. Pat, you are a lawyer in Wisconsin, so you do have some insight, on the actual law and how it's going to apply here. And I don't know, let's get into it and just talk about any interesting things that you've had from the trial. This is a pretty big spectacle. Unlike the Chauvin trial or most trials that I've, followed, it's not broadcast 24/7. And unlike any other trial that I've watched footage of, it's actually, I don't want to say interesting, but it's like the closest thing to a TV show trial I've ever seen where like witnesses made statements that like draw reactions. I don't know if I've ever seen in an actual courtroom somebody on the prosecution bench be unprincipled enough to actually react to a negative for their case. Maybe like upset at a like judge's ruling on an objection or emotion or something like that, but never like this at a witness statement. So and of course you have like kind of more popular figures who are comfortable in the press, like Richie McGinnis testifying. The judge himself seems to have maybe embraced the role of being on TV and made himself a little joke that has provoked some ire from. So this whole thing is just a giant spectacle, and yet we're trying to get truth and justice about questions where two people were murdered and one was seriously injured. And so just go ahead and open up, Pat.
Yeah, well, I think it certainly has been a spectacle, and it
Oh, you know
reminds
what?
me.
I said murdered. Two people were killed. I guess it's just very clear from the start there.
That's unduly prejudicial on your end, Kyle. Well, the last murder trial that was very high profile that happened in Wisconsin actually happened a couple of years ago, and I covered it a little bit on my show, but it was the the murder trial where Ezra McCandless was she was the defendant. She was accused of killing her boyfriend in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and she was being charged in I think Dunn County, which in front of a judge that I've actually practiced in front of. So it was really interesting to see a judge I'd practice in front of be on court TV, and that was a big thing. So in comparison to the Rittenhouse trial, like you said, we have actual attorneys being animated in the courtroom. We have a judge who's made a more of a personality of himself than the judge in the McCandless case. So I think that's one of the bigger takeaways from this is I don't know, man. It in a way it couldn't be worse for the national pedestal that this trial is on right now. Is all these things, and I think that the more abnormal things are and the more things that people have to pick at, the more it undermines the absolution of what the verdict will be. And I think that's bad for cultural stability in the United States. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, and also just for the justice system too, where especially the way it works normally with judges and prosecutors specifically, but even attorneys who can make a name, a reputation, and a lot of money. Even journalists, witnesses, members of the jury have written books after these trials, especially when they're as big national events as the Rittenhouse one, can be very profitable. And so, you really have to worry about like how much performance maybe is going on here for people. Not, their first priority isn't like truth, justice, or anything like that, and really just trying to increase their own notoriety. Maybe that's why you had some of the actions that you had from the prosecutor that drew the ire of the judge, and maybe that's why. Although people say this judge is pretty consistently like confrontational, and I guess we'll be like rude or blunt towards prosecutors or something. I don't know what the decorum is and what the right way to say it. You would probably understand that better than I do, Pat. But at the same time, like, maybe you're looking for a big slam dunk because you're on TV. I don't know. More than any trial I've ever like watched a significant amount of time of, which hasn't been made because most aren't televised, but and especially any trial that I've ever like covered or watched like a documentary of, because a big thing I do is watch like wrongful conviction documentaries. This almost feels like My Cousin Vinny at times.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't think that's an exaggeration. It really has felt like that. And as for the prosecutor who's making, like, I don't know, he's made himself infamous, especially with all the memes being made about him. Um, I, all of the reaction that you're getting from YouTube lawyers, like real lawyers, but they're on YouTube watching the trial, about him bringing up evidence that was excluded in a pretrial motion, and at the final pretrial, you don't do that. And maybe there's an argument to be made. He made one unsuccessfully, but he made an argument that the door was open to it, where it was pre-decided before the trial. Like, a lot of people don't understand that when you're going into trial, everything is pretty much set up. You've argued what's coming in and what's not coming in, and so there's not supposed to be any surprises at trial. And when the judge has already made a ruling on a piece of evidence coming in or out, you don't talk about it. And it was pretty. I don't know. A lot of people were surprised. I think I was surprised, but it seems like the Rittenhouse event, when it occurred, it was one of the events where we were tumbling down the rabbit hole when reality started to turn into this clown world. And so I think the trial just kind of goes along with this surreal feeling.
Yep. And as you say, it's such a shame that so many people are investing so much of how they view their neighbors, not just the country at large or the justice system, which may be very fair to judge the justice system based off of how much of a clown show there has been here from multiple parties involved. But I want to like start asking you a couple questions about the actual case. And just from the legal perspective, we don't have to break down like libertarian or anything like that for now. Uh, I guess in Wisconsin, if you are 17 years old, can you have a gun on like It did seem to me that he was like on public property at times, that that he was had some permission to be on a piece of private property to defend a piece of private property, but that there were times throughout the night that he definitely was not on. And he may have been saying that he was a medic at the time, but he was carrying a rifle. And so what's the legality there?
Well, actually, I'm sorry, I didn't take a close enough look at that. I focused mostly on the self-defense claim. Um, but so I'm not going to speculate on that. I did hear
Okay.
somewhere, maybe in Tim Pool's coverage on the issue, that charge might be thrown out. Did you hear that?
Yeah, so there is an argument around the law itself, whether it's too vague, unconstitutionally vague or not. And so I guess that is one question. Although I think part of that, and part of what at least people's understanding was of why this would be illegal, is because he brought this gun from Illinois to Wisconsin. Now, you know, invisible lines on a map aside, legally that would be different. But I do understand in that I don't think this was challenged in court at all. That the gun itself it doesn't leave Wisconsin. And I don't know if it is, Kyle Rittenhouse's property legally, or if this is just a gun that he is able to use anytime he is in Wisconsin. That seems more to be the case to me. But yeah. And so, anyways, let's get into the self defense then, Pat.
Yeah, so under Wisconsin statutes, and I apologize, I didn't look into that before we started recording, but so Wisconsin statute 939.48 outlines self-defense and defense of others. And if you want to, you can go and just take a look at that. But it says a person is privileged to threaten or intentionally use force against another for the purpose of preventing or terminating what the person reasonably believes to be an unlawful interference with his or her person by such other person. The actor may intentionally use only such force or threat thereof as the actor reasonably believes is necessary to prevent or terminate the interference. The actor may not intentionally use force which is intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm unless the actor reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or herself. And then there's another one about let's see here, Wisconsin statutes. Defense of property and protection against retail theft. And I think this is very interesting because part of what's being talked about in the trial is whether or not you have the right to use deadly force or threaten deadly force in defense of property. Because what has kind of been talked about is, oh, well, Kyle Rittenhouse was going there expressly with the permission of the business owner to act as a sort of armed security there. And so it's interesting to take a look at this. A person is privileged to threaten, this is Wisconsin statute 939.49. A person is privileged to threaten or intentionally use force against another for the purpose of preventing or terminating what the person reasonably believes to be an unlawful interference with the person's property. Only such degree of force or threat thereof may intentionally be used as the actor reasonably believes is necessary to prevent or terminate the interference. It is not reasonable to intentionally use force intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm for the sole purpose of defense of one's property. And so I was reading this article from Legal Insurrection, and I had watched I think there was someone from Legal Insurrection that was on Timcast with Tim Pool talking about this. But they say that the prosecution's last hurrah is this argument that's kind of like a domino theory. And I think you'll appreciate that term, Kyle. But the domino theory being that the initial interaction between Kyle Rittenhouse and Joseph Rosenbaum, according to the prosecution's theory, was that Kyle threatened Joseph Rosenbaum first, or someone else, that Kyle was trying to prevent someone from burning down the business. So he pointed a gun at a third person, and Rosenbaum saw this, and that's what provoked the attack. And that Rosenbaum was actually acting in defense of that third person. So according to Legal Insurrection is theorizing that if it so happens that Kyle Rittenhouse started the chain of events by unlawfully pointing the firearm at a third person, which he doesn't have a right to threaten or use deadly force against someone purely in defense of property. So if so, then Kyle Rittenhouse was not in the right here. Now, there's another argument that Kyle's defense team could make, saying that so maybe he did point a gun at a third person to prevent the burning down of the business, and Rosenbaum chased him and threatened deadly force, and Rittenhouse made a good faith attempt to run away, and that he retreated from the situation. If he did everything that he could to make a good faith retreat, and he clearly indicated his retreat, but the attacker, Rosenbaum, still persisted, then Kyle could renew his ability to use deadly force in defense of himself. So it's a very complicated set of facts that we have here.
Yeah, well, it would seem, I guess, the way you read the self-defense law, at the point where Kyle was retreating, then Rosenbaum's claim to self-defense would pretty much dissolve, right? Because he's no longer a threat if he's running the opposite direction. I guess, could they maybe argue that a young, I guess, nobody knows that Kyle is 17, but a young man in the street with an AR-15 is in some way just inherently either such a provocative or scary, destabilizing action, right? And so let's just go absurd. If there's like a 3-year-old in the middle of a street waving around a handgun, like whoever gave that 3-year-old the handgun could, is inciting a riot, right? Like people would be ducking, diving out of the way, trying to grab the, who knows what's going to happen, right? And so is there maybe like something where if you did see someone who looked kind of childish running around the streets with this high powered rifle, that in itself is problematic enough that he can't then claim self-defense because he's essentially provoking whatever happened?
Right. I mean, personally, I just think that argument is absurd. And I've heard other arguments from the prosecution, or rather from the media more so, is this argument that, oh, he went there with a rifle, that just being present with open carrying a rifle is incitement, right? I completely disagree with that. And again, you probably couldn't tell whether or not Kyle was an 18-year-old or anything like that. But I just think it's absurd. I mean, you have a constitutional right to carry a weapon outwardly. And now, do I think it's a good idea to open carry a rifle? I think that's another conversation. But in this situation, I don't think it's incitement just to be having a rifle. Okay. Now, I don't have any case law to back that up, because as a lawyer, you're always supposed to explain why you think something. But I don't have any case law aside from just common sense and relying upon a constitutional right to open carry.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with you on that. And I generally don't think that you could especially claim that he was like trying to murder anybody. It did seem that he made an effort to run away, and I could see how he feared for his life. But for somebody who really wanted to argue that, hey, look, you did have a 17-year-old in the street who did point their gun at someone, which I believe that fact is in dispute by the defense, that there's like some blurry video that they're relying on. And look, this is one of those things from the Rittenhouse trial that people are getting all upset about and making political, and it really, really shouldn't be. Video evidence that the government uses is often far more questionable than people think. Videos are a series of frames, so however quickly you're taking the frames, or however many stills or pictures you get, and what's in the middle between those is invented by the brain or algorithms. And so it could be a lot more blurry than people, quite literally, but also like figuratively too, than people think whenever they say we have video of this or that thing. Understand that you have a picture of something that people are trying to tell you about. And, like some things, like if there's one guy in the street and you walk up to him, point a gun and shoot him in the head, there's no questions in there as to what really happened, right? But, this clearly isn't what we have here. And Pat, maybe we could talk in a minute about what the hell is the FBI doing with high quality drone footage of this event. But at the same time, it it does seem to me that there's a lot of questions there, and this isn't limited to Kyle Rittenhouse. A lot of people have been burned on bad video evidence in the past, and don't let this become political.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really important. I think that it's been in the books for years, this domestic surveillance, and that in my opinion, I think there was an ACLU documentary. I actually used footage from it in remember my Emerging American Police State documentary. I used a cut from that document from a documentary talking about domestic spying, that government agencies were flying drones over U.S. cities, and that someone had actually gone through the aerial logs. I don't know if it's the FAA who keeps aerial logs of airplanes, but they found that there were airplanes that were flying circles around major U.S. metropolitan areas. And there's this other program called Operation Gorgon Stare. You'd have to double check me on that citation, Gorgon Stare. But essentially, what I understand it is a drone that they've used in the Middle East that basically 3D maps out an entire
I think
city.
it might be a multi-drone system, just to clarify. But I think the idea, and they've apparently used it in some Iraqi cities, is they have just so much drone overhead and so much footage they could essentially track individual people around the city.
Yeah,
Now, how well it works, I guess I have questions about, but they think they could do it. You know, I mean,
yeah,
they think they could hit terrorists in the middle of Kabul. Obviously, they can't, but
right.
you know, they think they can. And so
Yeah.
that is technology, but they obviously have some high quality drone footage here. So Pat, I guess a lot of it seems to really depend on whether the shooting of Rosenbaum, the first one, was justified or not. Because if it is justified, then this is Kyle Rittenhouse attempting to run for safety, being assaulted by people who are trying to prevent him from doing so. I do think, you know, it's hitting somebody in the head with a skateboard, taking two swings off that comes pretty close to lethal force. Like, you know, I know people don't think about this, but there's a part of the skateboard that's like solid metal, and so it is kind of like swinging a baseball bat at somebody's head. And I think if it
Right.
was a baseball bat, people really wouldn't question that this guy was coming for Kyle Rittenhouse's life. And then the third person that he shot who didn't die, it pointed a gun at him. And so, like, you know, I don't think in either of these two cases, it's not like somebody was like pushing him to the ground. He didn't shoot the person. Now there could be reasons for it, or he may have even, somebody said, shot at the person who attempted to jump kick him with him. So I don't know anything on all that. Just how does it really just matter about the first one, or could there be anywhere from the on down the line where he could be charged with various crimes?
Well, I think that in I wanted to go back first and reflect on this incitement idea that we were talking about earlier, because you can, and this applies to the other two killings too, because you can go back and do a reverse analysis from different people's perspectives. So say Rittenhouse, right? He brings an AR-15 to a riot, and then they're arguing that that's incitement, which entitles people to kill him in self-defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or so the argument would seem. But we read the statutes. You heard us read the statutes. Part of these elements are proving imminence of the threat, proportionality of the response, and reasonableness of perceiving the threat. And so the argument here is that someone's carrying an AR-15. There's no imminence to the threat because they're not pointing it at anyone unless they have, you know, they're in a ready stance, their fingers on the trigger, anything like that. They have a magazine in. And reasonableness. Is it reasonable to assume someone open carrying is about to sling the gun down and start mowing people down? I don't think so. But then again, that instance where we were talking about, you know, the initial interaction with Kyle pointing a gun at someone initially, someone that wasn't Rosenbaum, a third person. Now, from the other person's perspective, let's say that Kyle, just for sake of argument, that Kyle did point a weapon at a third person to tell them to stop burning down the business. Now, whether you agree with the ability to use lethal force in protection of property or not, legally speaking, you can't do that according to Wisconsin statutes. So let's say that Rosenbaum was justified in pursuing Rittenhouse. I don't think that he was, because he reached for the weapon. He yelled, "I'm going to kill you, mother effer." Um, but so Kyle kills him and it wasn't self-defense. Well, then he's running towards the police barricade. Now, whether or not other people are justified in killing him, I believe depends on an analysis of the statute, but also taking those elements into consideration. Is Kyle innocent? That's one of the elements of self-defense. Well, no. Would the people attacking him perceive that he was imminently going to kill more people? Um, I don't think so, but that's just my opinion. He's running down the street yelling friendly, friendly, friendly. He doesn't have a rifle at the ready. It doesn't seem to me at that point. Maybe he does. Maybe he's carrying it. But he's yelling friendly and giving indications that he's not going to shoot people. Proportionality, while someone carrying a rifle, if they're pointing it at you, then you would be justified in using lethal force. But reasonableness is the other factor. And avoidance is another factor as well. But that has a different implication. But is it reasonable to
Just real
assume?
quick, would the fact that
Yeah,
he was running towards the police line matter at all?
I
Because
think
I
so.
mean, that would seem to me to like maybe be an indication that he wasn't seeking to go on a shooting rampage. I
Right.
mean, people had their feelings about the cops and how the cops treat Kyle Rittenhouse and everything like that we could talk about later. But if somebody is seems to be making an effort to surrender to the police, that would seem to take away some of the justification for attempting to make like a citizen's arrest or something like they're doing here.
But does Grosskreutz and the other guy who was shot, do you know his name? I can't remember his
Huber,
name, but Huber. Do Grosskreutz and Huber, do they know that at the time? Because it matters what they knew at the time, what their impression was,
right?
and it matters whether their impression was reasonable.
True.
So those are things to look at.
Yep. So I don't know. I mean, we could get into like a lot more weeds here, and of course, no matter what happens at trial, I think the most important part of a trial, other than maybe pre-trial stuff, what gets left in and out, is the jury selection. And I don't know a lot about the jury selection at all for this trial, minus the one incident with one juror who I believe made a joke that honestly when I heard that I really thought it was more a joke at the expense of Kenosha police than Jacob Blake, but you know, be I mean, like I have mixed feelings about it. Like if you're stuck listening to this stuff 12 hours a day and like you crack a joke at the end of the day, like you're probably like mentally exhausted. Like, you're determining a murder trial here. Like this is serious stuff. Like, and so I don't think it's the most critical thing. But other than that one jury, I really know nothing about the jury pool. I know that it was like I think selected in a day. Some of these trials, jury selection is like one of the most long processes of the whole thing and most important processes. So I don't know. Just assuming like a reasonable jury that could go either way. Do you have any impressions on how this will go, and kind of like what your thoughts are as a Wisconsin lawyer?
Well, you know what? I'm going to turn that in your face because you actually lived in Kenosha, and I think that you would have much more insight than me. I lived in Wisconsin my whole life, but I'll tell you, southeastern Wisconsin is a different animal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really have no idea because when I was in Kenosha, I went to Carthage College, which was, I mean, a couple miles from where this all happened. I've, been around that area. It's not like I hung out at that car lot or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the days before this, I did talk to several of my friends. Be like when the riots started and everything, I started talking to people. If you'd listened to the old foreign policy focus show, you would have like heard my breakdown. I actually talked to one of the people who was on CNN who was confronted by Rosenbaum within like a half hour before this whole thing happening. And so, I do have some contacts and everything. If there's people from you know what, I don't even know because like my friends from Carthage, I have a feeling that they wouldn't vote to convict. However, I do know that in the year since, maybe the school's a little bit more liberal, or on that side of things. I really have no idea how the just the random Kenosha resident though would feel about it. I guess my overall feeling, at least from the public reset the from what I saw of the trial and everything like that, it certainly seems like the defense has scored more points. Now I don't know how much of a deficit they started this whole thing at, but they're definitely up by a lot in the trial, and I think that probably sways the jury just based on that, and the fact that the prosecution's arguments seem fairly weak, and right now it seems like most of what they have is based off of the chain of events that starts with the blurry photograph, which I don't think will be enough. Now a lot of people are talking about, will the jury look for like a lesser charge? Maybe, but honestly, if you think it's self-defense, it's self-defense. And so
Right.
I think that might be a problem the jury has there, and Kyle Rittenhouse is just found innocent.
Yeah, and I wonder what will happen too. And to circle back on the possession of a dangerous weapon by a person under 18, I mean, it appears that that's the law, that it appears to, it applies to a person under 18 years of age. But your understanding is there an argument he was on private property that whole time? Because
No,
that would
no,
be.
no, no.
Oh, I see.
I definitely saw him running around the street and stuff. And so maybe so this
Or
is,
before then.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, yeah,
before. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
What I mean, was your impression was that at all times he was armed with the AR-15, he was on private property that he had permission to be on?
I don't think so. I think he was running. I think I saw a video of him running around yelling medic all night.
I see.
And
Okay,
I
yeah.
definitely saw a video of him around some cops, which was not at that lot. I'm not exactly sure where that was, but earlier in the night, there's a video of him where he, like, is walking around. The cops like are like, "Oh, hey, cool," to the kid and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
all right, go ahead. Why?
Well, in one part of the reason why I didn't focus on it is because it's only a class A misdemeanor, and so I don't know if it's of much consequence.
I
And maybe
guess
the only
only if
consequence.
like they claim that breaking that law is enough to set off this whole chain of events and everything that happens is Kyle's fault.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. So yeah, and I don't know if that really. I think there would have to be more of the argument would have to go that he was, in the commission of a dangerous felony or event that would justify someone else to use defense in trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess, Pat, I think for me and you, from the conversations we've had, maybe what's frustrated us most about all of this is it seems that there are two narratives here. One is that Kyle Rittenhouse intentionally crossed state lines with an illegal weapon somewhere that he had absolutely no business being, to provoke a situation where he could then murder people who were supporters of Black Lives Matter because he was a white supremacist. I'm not trying to like completely straw man. I think we've done a fairly good job of steel manning both sides before this, but that is the narrative that's being put out by a lot of people, including people within the mainstream media right now. And then on the other side, you have people being like, this Chad yeeted 3 pedophiles or something like that. Kyle Rittenhouse is a hero, and thank God that we have Kyle Rittenhouse to, be the great person who put down the riots and stuff like this. So, I'm wondering your take on that, Pat.
Yeah. Well, I mostly, I hate to do this because Dave Smith just covered this exact thing that I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to say a lot of what he said, and I wanted to do it before he said it. But my thoughts on it basically are it does concern me a little bit that libertarians are making him into a libertarian hero. And I don't think that he is. And like, don't get me wrong, I do personally believe he was acting in self-defense. I believe that as a libertarian, he has a right to go there and defend people's property if they ask him to do that, if he's hired to do that. But there's a difference between, being a libertarian and at the same time making choices that are intelligent choices and choices that I at least, because now look what's happened to him. He has gotten in a situation where he could have died several times. He handled himself very well in those situations, better than most people would. But he has completely ruined his life. He's killed 2 people, seriously injured a third. He has PTSD, it seems, from what I've seen. He's severely emotionally scarred. He's put other people in danger, and he's in danger again He's being cast as some kind of white supremacist in the national media. He's literally on trial for, life. And he he's has all these bad outcomes. And I think that is libertarian. Oh, the other thing is that he's forced a trial on the validity of self-defense, because I think that, the the implication of this trial is more than just it's more than just what happens in this specific instance. This is a trial of self-defense in America, and he has forced this issue. And what if we lose this trial in the court of public opinion? And I think that as libertarians, we have a chance to, I mean, conservatives, people who love the Second Amendment, we could lose this right now. And so I caution people who would hold Kyle Rittenhouse up as some kind of Hoppian champion of, Second Amendment rights, someone that we should all emulate, because in my opinion, he's a foolish kid who made a stupid, careless decision. He was within his rights, and, that doesn't mean we can't defend our property. But I think the most intelligent people who are actually prepared and who actually practice with weapons, self-defense, they know that the best way to defend yourself is to de-escalate and avoid a confrontation. And I don't think that he did that. His intentions might have been good or pure, but I think they were naive. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of really strong points there, Pat. One thing that really upset me when this whole thing happened, I took a lot of heat from libertarians on my initial analysis, because I did say, he shouldn't have been there. And of course, if I had told any libertarian that we shouldn't send 18, 19-year-old, even 20-year-old, young 20-year-old boys to Iraq to walk around with, I understand that like an AR-15 isn't actually a military weapon, but to walk around with rifles and to like, think that they actually had the ability to like control a situation and de-escalate and everything like that, every libertarian would agreed with me. But because that he got turned into a libertarian hero, there, oh, he had a right to be there. Why are you saying he didn't? And it's like, there's a difference between like, if he could have been and if he should have been. And also, I guess to some point, this is, I think, really problematic. Having 17-year-olds go to protest in the middle of the night with ARs. And I think even more dangerous is that he was walking around with a fucking medics vest, and like I think that he thought that he would be perceived as a medic.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm like putting too much virtue on the kid. Maybe, but I really think that that's kind of what he thought. But if you're carrying around an AR, almost
Alone
nobody, right, almost
at the time.
nobody, yeah, unless you're somebody like myself or maybe you, Pat, who's been around guns a lot, you're not going to be comfortable with that, and you're not going to see the medic. You're only going to see a gunman, right? This is like the same thing like if a soldier is a medic, right? Like they're a soldier to everybody else. Like maybe to the person whose lives they saved, they're a medic, or to somebody they render aid to, but like 90% of the time if you're walking around with a gun, you're a soldier, and that is what it is. And so I think he really tried to conflate it, and I have a real problem with it, especially the way the right wing has tried to pretend that he was a medic. You can't be a medic if you're carrying around a gun. Now, the mainstream media has the exact same problem, because the last person that he shot, I can't pronounce this guy's name, who he shot in the arm, was, I believe, or at least at one time, a paramedic, and they're describing him as the paramedic, and he also was a man carrying around a gun that night. There's a couple other things that I just want to hit on that it really bothered me about the way this was covered. I didn't realize, and I had like covered this and like looked into it, that Kyle Rittenhouse's, I believe, father, one of his siblings, and several other family members lived in Kenosha. And so if he's a 17-year-old child of divorce, like, he may live with his mom, like on school documents, and that's where he spends most of his time. But like dad's house is also home too, I'm sure. Right. And so I'm sure he kind of looks at Kenosha as home. So all this, like, he didn't have any right to be in Kenosha, is really stupid. The whole white supremacist argument comes across as really, really empty, especially given the fact that none of the people he shot were, black, and the fact that at the very least Rosenbaum, like, may like, even if Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have killed him, there's absolutely no doubt that he was not there to support Black Lives Matter. Right? Like, I don't know what he was doing out there that night. It kind of seems like maybe he was going through some kind of mental health crisis, to be quite honest, or in some kind of drug induced state. But he was not out there to support Black Lives Matter or, you know, protest at all. Yeah, to describe him as a protester doesn't make sense. I have no idea about the second two. If you could even remotely describe them as protesters, like if they were there during the day supporting the cause or anything like that. But certainly the first one what wasn't no, and that doesn't mean that he should be shot. I'm not trying to make that point, but it's inaccurate to describe him as a protester. Kyle didn't carry the gun across state lines. That's another big issue that I have that a lot of people get wrong. Like, you know, it's just factually not right. And so I think those are like kind of the big ones that had really bothered me. I don't know if you had any, Pat.
Well, even the way that they're spinning it now, that like Gage Grosskreutz, his testimony, basically he admitted the fact that what happened is on video. Anyone can see it. And if I were the defense attorney, I would, in closing arguments, one of those, I would play that video over and over and over and over and over again of Grosskreutz surrendering and playing possum. Then Kyle, you know, points the gun at him. Grosskreutz surrenders. Then he kind of backs up, and Kyle goes to get up, and then Grosskreutz pulls, I think it was a Glock from behind his waistband, and points it at Kyle, and that's when Kyle shoots him. And in the New York Times, in their fact sheet about this, said that Grosskreutz surrendered to Kyle when he was shot. So the damage control in the spin on this, and I'm this is my I'm speculating here, but I'm just speculating that, to me, I get the impression that the media is trying to polarize this as much as they can. And to me, it seems like they want some kind of escalation reaction to what the verdict might ultimately be.
Yeah, I mean, and especially in some of the other ways they described it, like by saying there was a lone survivor of the incident or something like that. It's just, it's unreal that, you know, you would really think that he walked in and just started unloading into a crowd of people at a protest or something like that, which it just simply isn't an accurate description of what happened here. Now, Pat, one last question I want to ask you, one last point I wanted to make, and that is, fortunately, and I very lucky, because this happened in, like, you know, Kenosha is like kind of all semi-residential, but this happened like in a semi-residential area. You know, how bullets go through walls all the time, hit kids, like these things happen. Fortunately, it seems that only people are, at least as far as all public information is, only people that he pointed the gun at, only his intended targets were hit, only people who were at least in some way involved in aggression against him. You know, particularly the two that were killed are not sympathetic figures at all. They were people with pretty horrific criminal histories, particularly Rosenbaum. But reckless endangerment, right? Like the fact that he had to shoot his way out of there did put other people, including people who lived nearby, you know, at potential risk of being hit in this gun battle. And so, you know, this will kind of roll into our next case a little bit kind of well, but, you know, does he have any responsibility, at least for me morally? You know what I mean? I do think that, you know, that's one of the reasons that you don't carry a gun into a protest, is because you never know. Not carry a gun. Like, if you like really feel like there may be some danger and you conceal carry at a protest or something, like that would be one thing. But to open carry an AR like this at a protest, the reason it is irresponsible to do it is you could very easily, not very easily, but you could very possibly set off a chain of events like this, and where, again, I think he's very fortunate to have not killed a person who was truly innocent in all of this, and you know, a real tragedy occurred. And so I'm just interested on your thoughts on that.
So Wisconsin statute 941.30 it is not helpful in this situation, because it just says whoever recklessly endangers another's safety under circumstances which show utter disregard for human life is guilty of a Class F felony. And then a second degree reckless endangerment is whoever recklessly endangers another's safety is guilty of a Class G. So I'm sure this is all based off case law,
Yeah.
is the argument. And I'm sure that I think that logic would go to show that if you're acting in self-defense, this should drop off. But I
Right.
think, I mean, from a libertarian point of view, this is like, there's the argument Lou Rockwell makes against drunk driving laws, is that you're criminalizing a behavior that didn't result in any harm. There's no victim when you do something reckless. Sure, you put someone at a degree of risk, but there's no actual act or damage that takes place. So therefore, it's a victimless crime. Um, so that's just my thought about that. Morally speaking, I don't agree that the state should prosecute these crimes. And an individual, I don't believe, yeah, an individual wouldn't be able to do a private civil suit and recover damages for this because there are no damages. So,
Right. All right, so let's get into this Philly story. I mean, Pat, when I sent this to you, was it just not one of those things that you read and you're kind of shocked by it a little bit? For anybody who's not watching here, the headline is two teens were charged with murder in the police shooting that killed an 8-year-old girl at a high school football game. And yes, it is actually that absurd where you had there's two kids, Angelo AJ Ford and Hassan Strand, who were having a gunfight of some kind with each other, shooting at each other, and police then started shooting at them but didn't hit them and only hit an 8-year-old girl, killing her. But yet only the two teens are facing charges of murder. So how the hell does this happen?
Kyle, this reminds me of, there's a South Park episode, I think, where I think it's Butters is like holed up in a house and the police come to rescue him. And maybe it's like one of the first South Park episodes, maybe it was Cartman, but he leaves the house and the police show up to rescue him, but they just end up shooting and killing everyone. It's kind of like that. So, I mean, imagine that you're at a high school football game. There's two kids who start to have like a gun battle in the parking lot, and the police show up and start spraying the crowd. I mean, that's kind of what occurred here.
Which would be absolutely criminal on the part of the police. Leave it alone, there, Pat, and absolutely absurd. But at the same time, I think at least for me and you, as much as we cover this, not unsurprising police behavior. And not unsurprising if the police weren't then charged with the murder of the little girl that they killed. However, the part that was striking to me is that they then charged the kids in this case. So what happens there?
Well, I think it's completely garbage because what they say here is, and maybe this is speculation on the side of the Philadelphia Inquirer, but they say in charging the two teens with murder, prosecutors are relying on the legal concept of transferred intent. The idea that if a person intends to harm someone but inadvertently harms someone else instead, that is a crime, according to Roos. Oh, so maybe they're not speculating. Is Roos the district attorney in this one?
Yes.
Okay. So what I don't understand about this, and maybe this is my own ignorance, but from what I remember from law school, the concept of transferred intent is more akin to, let's say that, I want to shoot Kyle in the head. So I try to shoot you with intent to shoot and kill you, but instead I miss and I hit a bystander in the crowd and kill that person. You could charge me with first degree intentional, premeditated murder, even though I intended to kill Kyle, but I killed someone in the crowd. So obviously you see the problem with this here is that they are charging the kids when the kids didn't kill anybody. The police did. So the distinguishing factor, at least as I see it here, is that you could only charge one of the kids with transferred intent homicide if the kids were the ones who killed this 8-year-old girl. But It's the act of a third party. So there's another legal concept, Kyle, you might have heard of this, called felony murder.
Right.
And felony murder occurs when you are in the commission of a dangerous felony and someone dies because of the felony. And that's what this appears to be for me. And I don't know if I
just
agree
for
with
people who don't know as much, this is like the getaway driver thing, right? You're the getaway driver for a bank robbery. A guy inside the bank kills the bank teller. You can then be charged with that homicide.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen it in a little bit more ridiculous
Right, but
just
I mean that's like the kind of cut line principle. So one thing I have that doesn't make sense to me here, Pat, too, is I forget which team was which, but one of them opened up fire on the other, and then the other one fired back. Which I don't know, maybe he has a self-defense claim there. Although it does seem like maybe there was a slight gap of time in there. But how is it that the police are charging both of them with murder? I don't know. That seems a little odd to me that they wouldn't have to pit the aggressor between the two at least.
yeah, and I guess you would have to wait for that all to kind of play out here. I mean, maybe the argument is that it's mutual combat or something like that. Um, I'd only be speculating because I think this is Philadelphia or this is Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know Pennsylvania law.
Okay. Yeah, it just kind of seemed to me to like be another indication that this was like kind of a lazy harebrained thing to absolve the police of their guilt here. And so I guess Pat, you're district attorney and obviously you don't know all the Philadelphia laws and everything, but it does seem to you that the police should be the ones, whichever police officer, at least maybe not all of them, but at least whatever police officer fired the bullet that hit the girl should be the one taking the majority of the legal liability here. I mean, like, I guess, like, I could see, the kids should be charged with something. They were like firing guns at each other during a football game. I mean, that's a dangerous act in itself, but that doesn't make them guilty of this murder.
No, no, it doesn't. Maybe I mean maybe under felony murder, or you can make an argument. We already talked about this reckless endangerment.
Right.
Possibly they could charge them under Wisconsin law for reckless endangerment. But yeah, it all goes. It feels like something should happen to them, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, definitely because like this is like a popular in not popular I guess, but a place with quite a few people for this football game, and we didn't mention, but this little girl, they got a nice little picture of this girl here, was the one that was left dead. What's her name? Fanta Bitley. And this did happen in August, but the charges were just placed on them. I'm gonna really try to follow this one, Pat. And maybe we'll have you back on to talk about it once this trial actually takes place or something starts to happen. And, I guess one thing that people would point out, and I see a lot with the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, is they'll say, well, he wouldn't get this trial if he were black or something like that. And I'm not certain, but I did like look up I couldn't find actually pictures of the two who are alleged to be guilty of murder. Maybe because one's 16, I don't know if they would put that out even if it's a homicide charge. But this is to be like a predominantly black area. And so, I think there's a good chance that even though this seems to be more thin than the charges against Kyle Rittenhouse, based on the, possible level of access that they have to for quality of attorneys, if they just get some random, what are they called? Court appointed public defenders or something like that. But at the same time, like that doesn't make Kyle Rittenhouse guilty. So that, I think that's one problem people really have with that argument. But I do worry about that in like this case or something like that, these kids end up getting railroaded just because they don't have the support or any like kind of sympathy, at least in part because of their race.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
All right, let's wrap up here by talking about this strike in Syria, where even more so because of their ethnicity and race, people in the U.S. don't care at all that a bunch of civilians were killed. This, in a way, Pat, kind of I feel like confirms of some of what me and Will had been talking about and reporting back in 2016, what was happening in Syria and Iraq, and basically trying to understand how the U.S. was possibly coming to the conclusion that they weren't killing civilians when they were bombing heavily civilian populated areas. We had talked to in 2017 some special forces guys, a Green Beret, who kind of laid out to us how the Mosul bombing happened and how indiscriminate the strikes were there and how many civilians potentially were killed and and how absolutely awful that was. And so this comes as absolutely no surprise to me whatsoever, anything that we find out in this article, and hopefully it's kind of start working here for us. Um, but basically, what you have is the New York Times going through and uncovering that in, I think, March 18th of 2019, the U.S. dropped a bomb on 80 people in Syria, and about 64 of them, at the very least, were women and children, and they called it a legitimate airstrike, and they chalked it up as being, and are still standing by it even after this New York Times report came out. I saw it today. They're saying that it was a legitimate strike, Pat. And they're saying that because women and children could possibly have been used as militants by ISIS, then essentially anybody was a potential militant.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the My Lai massacre a little bit, to make kind of a parallel. I know that in My Lai, it's alleged that I think it was between 350 and 500 people were killed. Again, the argument there being that, well, they could have given material support to the VC or something like that. But it's just sickening, Kyle, and it really it does remind me of the one that we just covered in Kabul. But man, I was looking at some of the, so NPR, there's an NPR article, I don't know if I sent it to you or not, but they go over what the conditions are that the U.S. military has to meet before they can use lethal force against a terrorism suspect. One of them is near.
Yeah, I didn't load that one up because I don't think that those rules of engagement were actually in place in 2019. I think those are from the Obama era.
Okay. Well, okay. So good point, and thanks for pointing that out. Well, but it was going to lead me into what this loophole is. And this loophole that they discuss in the New York Times article is imminent threat.
Yep.
And it seems like this imminent threat is this completely elastic provision.
Yeah. And so, this is, I think, a situation that's very similar to kind of the policing problem in the United States, where it's a far more cultural issue than like a legal one. And so, saying that we're going to charge police or require police to go to sensitivity trainings and all this kind of stuff isn't going to prevent these kind of mass murder situations from happening, and simply changing the language. And so I think under the Obama, at the end of the administration, they had it as being there would have to be a near certainty of no civilians being killed before they could launch a drone strike. And then the Trump administration, they changed it a little bit to make it almost a certainty, but that made it so they could carry out more strikes or stuff like that. And now the Biden administration is going to change. Nothing really changes because they could basically bomb whoever they want and get away with it. I mean, as we see in this case, the reporting is crazy, where you actually have military officers, not just some rank and file private, who is sitting at their computer or something like that, but military officers who were generally surprised. They did not believe that these airstrikes were carried out. They were like, we just watched a bunch of civilians get murdered right in front of us. And then not only that, they actually took it up and tried to make an issue of it, suspecting that war crimes were committed, and nothing came of it. It almost sounds unbelievable if it wouldn't happen all the time.
Yeah, it's just sad, and it really comes into question, how many are dead? How many are dead that we don't know about?
Oh yeah, I mean, and this is like the tip of the iceberg. This is something that I talked about a lot on the show with the recent strike in Kabul. This was the one-off example of where there's actually enough reporting and enough looking into it, where this is the one time where you actually had somebody in the military that was so disgusted by this that they really tried to make an issue out of it, or else it would just gone by without another. And even after they make an issue out of it, the Pentagon's still going to stand by it. So this is one of the points I really want to make on this, and how I want to tie this story in with the first two, where you look at who's guilty of murder here. And there may be some questions about particularly the strike or Task Force 9 group that was operating on the ground and apparently ordered the strikes. But really, Pat, I imagine if you would go after the head of Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, who again is also the general who is in charge of Afghanistan right now, and maybe you went after it at a top level and sent this guy to the ICC, right? Let him go to the International Court and face crimes in front of the Hague, and if they find him guilty, to go ahead and lock him up for life. You think that the next general in charge of CENTCOM is going to let this kind of stuff go on without any care? That seems to be to be one of the main differences that can make. Um, Again, Pat, the most striking part of this article to me, and I feel like they almost buried the lead a little bit in this New York Times article because they focus so much on this one incident in itself and the fact that it wasn't investigated, but rather that CENTCOM was counting anybody who essentially anyone who was big enough to hold a rifle, so 9-10 years old. It seems that they were all counted as potential militants. So how the hell many people have we killed in Syria? And this is the kind of thing that should have outraged the left, in that they should have been trying to impeach Trump on for 4 whole years. This happened during the Trump administration. This is murder. These are 64 people who are just trying to go about their lives, just completely eliminated. And who knows how many of the other 16 people they claim were ISIS fighters just happen to be males. I mean, Pat, if you're walking down the street with your wife and children and they kill all of you, they say, oh, we got 1 militant and 3 civilians. Well, that's not true. You just happened, to be a military age male, a ma'am. And so then, your life is automatically forfeit no matter what. Me or you, they could kill us and never have to count us as a dead civilian. Pretty much unquestionably. I don't know. What else do you have on that? Who do you think should be held accountable here?
I don't know. Everyone in the chain of command. I mean, everyone who greenlit this, and I've done some work on this. I mean, the moral culpability for soldiers who are acting under orders. I mean, do you believe that was it the pilot that dropped the bomb? I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah, so I mean, typically the pilots get told to drop the bomb or not. And from my understanding, I don't think that they have a whole lot of time to be oh, it looks like there's people down there. You know what I mean? I think that they're hitting the fire button before they even see the situation. And so in the case of a drone operator, I think then the person who hits the red button could be held far more accountable because they're watching what they're firing at. Where I think just kind of the way the technology of the fighter jets and how they work now, they're flying around, and so maybe they are, and they did say they dropped 3 bombs, I think, in this case. And so it is possible that, if any of the fighter pilots did potentially even realize the people down there were civilians, I think that's very problematic. And of course, if you are a fighter pilot, a part of the U.S. military, I mean, any just basic looking around of what the U.S. military does and who they bomb should make it that you can't participate in that, right? You're kind of guilty just by knowing that it's kind of likely that you're going to kill a civilian if you're a fighter pilot in a U.S. war drone in order to drop bombs. They're not good at hitting their targets. There is no intelligence. These people are just absolute morons. Pat, they still can't find the ISIS-K safe house that they say was the reason they blew up that family in Kabul a couple months ago. And so there's no intelligence here. They just hide behind the words and stuff like that. I don't know. I think that's those were the main things I had on this strike. I do feel like it really confirms a lot of what me and Will have been talking about on the show for the past couple of years, and just how careless the drone strikes were, not only in Afghanistan, where it was kind of assumed, and we do know from some reporting that they were killing anybody who was riding around on a motorbike with a hand radio or something like that, but also in Iraq and Syria, where these seem to be the rules of engagement, that anybody could be considered a militant so long as you weren't maybe an old man with in a wheelchair or an infant.
Yeah, and see, I wanted to maybe unjustly give them the benefit of the doubt, these officers who tried to push this issue, and say that maybe in the past, all the drone strikes that they've had, the majority of the ones that kill civilians are maybe where militants or military age males run into a house and there's a bunch of kids in the house that we just can't see. Probably safe to assume that lots of houses are filled with kids from a sane standpoint, but from their standpoint, they can't see them. I don't know. Or it's an instance like the one I covered, the drone strike in the Pesh Valley, that the Intercept covered in depth. That it's a truck. There's a bunch of people in the truck. They look like adults. Let's launch that missile. That doesn't absolve them, but at least that maybe, I guess what I'm trying to say is that maybe the only reason this one really came to light is because it was clearly a field with women and children in it. There's no different kind of circumstance like a truck full of people or a van full of people or, alleyways or children playing in a courtyard or something like that, or children in a house. This is a field with women and children. Clearly, bomb drops, kills them all.
I had a little bit of a different interpretation, and maybe this is more cynical on my part of why this is came out, and it actually has to do with the fact that there were two drones in the area when this happened. One had standard definition and one had high definition, and at least according to the New York Times reporting, the Task Force 9 that actually ordered the drone strike only had access to the standard definition and was unaware of the high definition drone footage. And so I almost wonder maybe if this represents bureaucracy differences within the Pentagon right here, and part of what you're seeing and why somebody is upset and really running this up the flagpole also has to do with the fact that this Task Force 9 was kind of stepping on their territorial toes and made a big mistake and embarrassed them. And so we're going to make sure the right people get embarrassed in all this, and they're actually not as concerned about the dead civilians and Syrians as it might seem. But Pat, there's so much focus that's placed on these small criminal offenses in the United States, and not that these aren't important, but the amount of people that are wars, the literal piles of dead women and children. I mean, 64 bodies is a pile of women and children that are wrapped up in these kind of murders, mass murders, atrocities, aren't even like remotely thought about or like meant to be addressed. Nobody's upset. Nobody cares. Everybody will have like the down to the last detail. Well, not everybody, but people have down to the last detail of the Rittenhouse trial, or everybody will have a formed opinion on it, but nobody will even care, bother to read this New York Times piece or watch a 3-minute video on it of what happened in Syria, even though, I mean, the death toll is multiple times higher.
Well, one of the things that really presses me to do the work that you and I do, you more so than me, Kyle, but every night I go up and my 4-month-old, it's our schedule that I take him into the bedroom and I change him, get him ready for bedtime, and I swaddle him and I look into his eyes, and he's so precious and so special, and covering the things that we cover, that you cover, thinking about someone a continent away driving, a remote controlled vehicle, dropping a bomb on him and completely taking that innocent, precious life and destroying it. It makes you, it's revolting. It's the worst thing I can possibly imagine. And then I imagine that happening to someone else's child. It's infuriating. And moreover, the fact that someone might convince my boy to sign up and do this, and that he would have to carry the moral weight of doing something I hope he wouldn't understand the consequences of, but living with that guilt for the rest of his life, it's infuriating, Kyle.
Yeah. How much, and I think this ties into the Kyle Rittenhouse thing too. One of the things I really don't like about the kid is he's a little cop lover. He's a cop worshiper.
It's true.
And as much as like, I don't like that about him, if you're a 17-year-old boy who grows up in America, it's kind of hard not to love the military and the cops, because that's who everybody is constantly making a hero of for you 24/7. It's a real cultural thing. And, people want to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, how much glorification that we give to our cops and our military is, it should definitely be a part of the conversation on how to fix the problems, that some of the problems that we have. But unless you have something else, we should probably wrap up there, Pat. We're over an hour now. I
Yeah.
really appreciate you coming back on the show. I'll have to have you back on again sooner. It's been like too long, a couple months, I think, since you were last on, when we talked about Sky Horton beating up an old man
Oh yeah.
in New York City.
Well, what one last thing about Rittenhouse is just that a message to our fellow libertarians is just, please just see this in shades of gray. This is a complicated issue, and don't join in the tribalism, putting him on a pedestal. Of course, some libertarians would call him a white supremacist. That's the other end of the spectrum. But we can see nuance in this. If we can't see nuance in this, then I fear for libertarianism in the liberty movement.
100%. Great point, Pat. All right, everybody, check out the Libertarian Institute for all of our work, libertarianinstitute.org. Pat, you're at Liberty Weekly on Twitter, right?
Liberty_weekly.
Liberty_weekly. That's what it is. All right, Pat,
Yeah.
thanks, and we'll do it again soon, buddy.
Thanks.